Welcome to the Pat White Show. Well, if you don't know it, you're probably going to learn about it pretty quickly because Fort Wayne, Indiana is starting to show a crime problem. And the crime problem is not about adults going over and robbing banks or liquor stores or whatever. It's young people. I mean, really young people, teenagers, shooting people. We saw what happened in downtown Fort Wayne after an event that happened downtown. Fort Wayne kids, well, shooting one another. And there's a problem. Now, the mayor says, well, we're going to have a program. We're going to figure out, get these kids doing stuff, keep them off the streets. Well, I'm going to ask a question here, and let's see if anybody wants to answer it. Because recently we had another shooting, a burglary, if you will. It happened in the 4400 block of Bowser Avenue. That's in the southeast side of Fort Wayne. Two young men, one age 13 and the other age 14. You heard me right, a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old shot an individual, a man in a robbery. 13 and 14-year-old. Now, these kids were picked up in the 3700 block of Gaywoods where they were apprehended. That's fairly nice neighborhood. Nice houses, row houses, if you will. But the problem is 13 and 14-year-old kids with guns shooting people. Now, here's a question I want to ask. All these shootings that have happened, where were the fathers? Yep, going to ask that question. Maybe nobody else wants to ask it, but I'm going to ask a question. Where were the fathers? Now, I don't know about you, but if I would have done something, well, even close to that heinous, when I was young, I would have got the tar beaten out of me by my father. So my question is, for all of these young kids that are running around with the gangs, getting hooked up to these gangs, shooting people, and thinking it's no big deal, where were their fathers? The one that happened downtown during the particular event downtown, there was the mother of the child that was charged, and well, she lawyered up. But the problem still is, do we go after the mothers? Do we go after the third party in this case, saying, well, the mother? Where are the fathers? That's the biggest question I think anybody or everybody should be asking in the situation. Here's a 13-year-old boy and a 14-year-old boy go to a place, shoot somebody, shoot a man, and they're looking at the juvenile justice system. The bigger question, once again, is, well, you want to go after the mother of the kid? Can the mother of a kid control a 13 or 14-year-old kid? I don't know. But I'm just asking the plain and simple question. Do these 13, 14-year-old and these young kids that are getting involved with these gangs, do any of them have a father running them, well, keeping them in control? Can I say that? Do any of these kids have a father keeping them in control? If they don't, in my opinion, and I'm probably stepping on somebody's toes, and I apologize for that, but the truth is, unless you have parental responsibility and parental control, and especially a father figure in the house telling a child, you don't do that or you're going to get a whooping, maybe that's the problem. These kids are out there looking for somebody else who is a father figure, who's somebody who's older and smarter and what have you. So they gravitate to somebody else and say, well, we're going to hang around him because he acts like a father to me. That's the problem, folks. That's where we stand in society. These two boys are going to go through the juvenile justice system, and I'm not sure what's going to happen to them. But I'm asking the question, in all these shootings and all these problems with the kids going on in downtown, where were the fathers? When you answer that question, maybe you get yourself in line with what the problem really is. There's the issue. There may be the root cause. It's an ugly one. You're not going to like it, and it's going to upset somebody. But the truth is, a family is a family, not just a mother. You need a mother and a father to control kids. That's just the way Mother Nature intended it, whether you like it or not. My opinion. But let's see exactly what the authorities learn when time comes to go before a judge. So, do you remember back in your life when you reached 16 years of age? Now, at that age, you were able to get a driver's license. That's what many people did back in the day. They wanted that license so that no longer mom and dad would have to take them to wherever they wanted to go. You get your license, and you can start driving. Well, it was a privilege. But to get that license, you had to take a test, if you remember correctly. It's a written test. You would answer all the questions on the test, which meant you had to be able to read the test. And the test was in English, so you had to read the test in English. And you had to look at the various signs, various figures, say that sign means this, that sign says that. You had to read what the sign said. And you had to put that all down in your examination document. And if you passed, then the inspection person at the BMV would take you out for a little driving test. You had to go out and drive, right? All right, that's fine. That's what you had to do to get your license. We all had to do that. But have you heard of the story about the truck driver down in Florida decided to make a U-turn on a major highway down in Florida, and there was video in his cab, and you saw him making the turn, and then you saw a vehicle right behind him crash into the trailer part of his vehicle. He's making this illegal turn. That crash killed 3 people. The driver, unflummoxed, just driving along. Guess what just happened? Well, as a result, the Department of Transportation has yanked the commercial driver's licenses of 177,000 truckers. Now, that number seems pretty high to me, but apparently these individuals all had commercial driver's licenses, a CDL they call it. They all had CDLs, but they couldn't read English. They couldn't read the signs. They couldn't communicate with police officers or whomever, inspection people, whenever they approached them. So, explain to me something. How do people who are not Americans, how are they able to come into the United States and get themselves a commercial driver's license, which I presume you have to know how to read the English language. You have to know how to understand and say what the signs say, and being able to communicate with the people that you're dealing with. How is it possible those people got a commercial driver's license? You know, that's a much more difficult license to get than your standard operator's license. And yet 107,000 or 117,000 or whatever it is, maybe 117,000 had their licenses pulled. Now, there's a truckers association that's very upset about this, saying you're taking away the livelihood of these people. They've been driving for 30, 40 years. I don't care. If you can't read English, if you can't speak and communicate in English, if you can't understand what the signs say and be able to read what the signs say, then what on earth are you out doing driving a vehicle on the roads of America? The people you're endangering are the people like me, my wife, my kids, and everybody else who's driving out there because you can't communicate. And then somebody needs to explain to me who granted them their licenses, who gave them their licenses, who stamped, approved, you're ready to go. I want to know. Now, I've been told most of this is coming from the state of California because that gentleman who killed the folks down in Florida, he was from California where he has his CDL. But all these truckers that are saying, oh, you're taking these people off the road. Yes, we are. Because you can't read, you can't write, you can't understand what's being said to you when you're being talked to by someone. And you have a commercial driver's license? Would you allow someone to fly an airplane that you're on that couldn't read the let-down charts, read the approach charts to an airport? Would you do that? Or someone who couldn't speak English to the tower when he's going to talk to air traffic control or the tower? Sorry. You know, believe it or not, you may not know this, but in the world, in the airline business, everybody, and I mean everybody in the airline business worldwide, all speak English. That's right. That is the number one language throughout the world if you're going to fly anywhere in the world. When I fly over to Europe or wherever I happen to fly back in the days when I was doing that, everybody I talked to spoke English. That's the rule in the aviation business. And yet here in America, we have people driving 80,000-pound trucks who don't speak English can't read, and that's allowable? Hey, sound a little harsh, and I apologize, but the truth hurts sometimes. Now, can that affect goods getting to the stores? Yes, it can. But what are you rather willing to give up? An empty shelf here and there, or your life because someone can't read a stop sign or a speed sign or anything else that's going on? CDLs are a privilege, just like driver's licenses are a privilege. And with the privilege comes responsibility. In my humble opinion, the responsibility of having a CDL, you should know how to read, write, and understand the English language. After all, that is the language of America. Well, fall has pretty much arrived, even though fall is not official until the 21st of this month. But according to weathermen, fall starts the 1st of September. So, that being said, apparently the football season is also starting. Now, high school football has started, college football has started, but the National Football League doesn't begin until, well, the first week of September. But a new study has just been released that, has a lot to do with the National Football League. And let's see what you guys think of this new study. According to this new study, your sexual activity, can I say that? Your sexual activity is based upon how well your football team does. Now you're going, what? All right, here's the deal. According to a new study that was done of 2,000 NFL fans, and according to what they learned from this research, that if your team, the ones that you support, if your team wins, the chances are you're going to become very, how can I say it, frisky? All right, very frisky if your team wins. Now, it turns out they reviewed all the different teams in the NFL with these 2,000 player or people they surveyed to find out which team had the most, activity if their team won. Turns out the team with the most and the highest activity after their team won was none other than the New York Giants. Now, personally, from my standpoint, I would have thought it would have been the New York Jets, knowing what their record is. But yes, the New York Giant fans are the most active after their team wins. So if you happen to be married to a New York Giants fan, you might know what to expect if the team wins. Now, it varies for other teams. Some were a lot less, depending on the team that it was. But I'm not going to go into all the different teams and talk about their relationships because, I'll leave that to somebody else. But in closing, should be pointed out that based on this 2,000-person survey of activity and based on the NFL teams winning, this coming September the 4th, which opens up the National Football League for this year, is National Sexual Health Day. So I'm bringing that up to you just so that you understand that that would be a day to, celebrate, if that's what you do. And if you're a football fan from the National Football League and your team wins, then you could become pretty active. And if you're a New York Giants fan, you become very active. And I still haven't figured out why it's not the New York Jets. But then again, I digress. So something new, something different, and something to make your, football season even better and what to expect if your team wins. Go Colts. I like to conduct this class in advertising and public relations just as something for you to know something about the media in case you didn't know. Media, as we know it, is changing. It's changing dramatically and it's changing pretty rapidly. Over the last few years, you've seen things happen. You're going, gee, I couldn't believe that's happened. Let me give you a perfect example here in Fort Wayne. The News Sentinel, afternoon newspaper we had for many years. You had the Morning Journal, the afternoon News Sentinel. Well, the News Sentinel ultimately died and went away. It's gone. And it went from digital publication to essentially, no publication at all. The Journal Gazette is now a mere shadow of its former self. It still publishes. But if you want to buy one of their copies of their publication, you go to the store, maybe a BP store, wherever. One publication, regardless of the day of the week, is going to cost you $1.50 for maybe 20, 30 pages? $1.50. Things have gotten tight for newspapers around the country. Newspapers, as we know it, are starting to die because communication is moving rapidly, and it's moving in the direction of digital. Perfect example, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, that's a well-known newspaper in the Atlanta area. It originally started back in 1939. James Cox with Cox Enterprises got the newspaper in 39. It was a journal back then. 11 years later, he got the Constitution and made it the Journal-Constitution. Well, like I said, it started back in 1939, but now the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has just announced that on December 31st, they're going to stop publishing. That's right, another major newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, is stopping publishing effective December 31st. You know why? Well, people don't read anymore. People don't go on, they don't pick up a newspaper. They don't pick up something to read. They want to read it, they're going to read it on a screen. They're going to read it on their laptop. They're going to read it on their telephone. That's where we've gone to, America. Well, that's what's happened over the years. So the AJC is stopping printing effective December 31st. Now, they will be introducing an app. And if you purchase the app or you acquire the app, you can purchase a subscription if you choose to the newspaper. Many newspapers today, you tap onto their website, you want to go in, they may allow you to view 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 stories at any given period. But eventually they're going to say, hey, you want to keep reading our stories? Sign up and pay our price. Because that's what's happened, folks. Newspapers are going from being a print product that you pick up in your hands, you get your hands dirty with a print on it, you're going to digital. You read it on your phone whenever you want. You can read it wherever you happen to be, on your computer screen, on your TV screen, whatever. But now you're going to pay. And that's the way things are going in the publishing industry. Pay to play, they're saying. And that's what people are doing. So another newspaper is biting the dust effective December 31st. Will other newspapers be following? Like, say, the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, or maybe the New York Times. Will they decide, hey, we can't afford publishing print anymore because the cost of newsprint is getting too much, circulation costs are too much, the cost for the people delivering the papers, everything has gone up in cost, but the one thing that's become cheaper is posting it online digitally. And when you have it online digitally, you're just putting it online, and if people want to read it, you're going to say, hey, you pay us money to read our product. That's where things are going, folks. Now you understand. Here in Fort Wayne, the Journal-Gazette is still publishing, but the News Sentinel is gone. That's a forebear to what's happening to the rest of the industry. Newspapers, as we know it, will be disappearing and moving over to the digital age, because that's, friends, is where everything is moving, and it's moving at the speed of light. In the last couple of weeks, there's been a giant hubbub about this girl named Sweeny, who apparently has done a commercial, if you will, both print and in television, for American Eagle, a company that makes clothes that people buy. Well, when you make clothes that people buy, you want to make sure they buy your clothes. So they hired her to do a commercial spread, and she did. And the entitlement said she had great genes. Well, that's a play on words, a double entendre, call it whatever you want. So I looked it up. Who the heck is this Sweeny chick? I don't know. She was born back in 1997, so it makes her about 28, 29 years old. She's from Spokane, Washington. Her mother was a criminal defense attorney. Not too terribly bad. And when Miss Sweeny graduated from high school, she graduated as the valedictorian, which means she ain't dumb. She was on the robotics team. She was also in the math club. Now, anybody who's in the math club, that's not exactly my league, okay? So she wanted to get in acting, but her mother said, nah, it ain't a good plan. She said, let me give you a business plan. So she presented her mother a complete business plan, what she was going to do and how she was going to do it. Turns out she did it. Well, now, she's done pretty well by herself. She owns 3 homes. She's invested in homes. And she's got a couple in California. One's a fixer-upper, and she's got a beautiful mansion down in Florida Keys, over $13 million. You see pictures of it, it's quite nice. But anyway, so she does this commercial for American Eagle. Well, American Eagle is a company, like I said, that sells products. People were very upset. Some people were very upset about this having genes, the white supremacy. I don't know what the hell they were talking about. But let me tell you about American Eagle. Their stock is up 32%. Now, I don't know about you, but when it comes to investing, that gets my attention. Up $4 a share. So apparently, whatever she's doing for these commercials for American Eagle, and you can see what they look like, see how she looks. Okay, fine. She's sort of attractive. All right, I'll give you that. Built like a 3-story brick pagoda. I'll give you that. But here's something maybe you don't know. She loves working on cars. She actually rebuilt a 1969 Ford Bronco. She did it. She also did a 65 Ford Mustang. And for Ford, who she happens to like apparently, she designed a 2024 Mustang. Apparently gave it away to somebody. So she's not a dummy. Now, are people getting upset about this? They can get upset all they want. She's taken it to the bank. She's got a great business plan. She's doing quite well. And the American Eagle, well, frankly, their stock is up through the roof. So in my opinion, for you folks that are getting upset about the facts that she's lounging around, well, look at Brooke Shields. Nobody seems to say anything about that. That was back in the 1980s. Brooke Shields did a thing, nothing comes between me and my Calvins. Well, you know what? Nobody got upset back then. So why are they getting upset today? What, because the term great genes was used? Gens? Well, who cares? She did a good job. She looks nice in the jeans. I personally don't care. All I care about is the fact American Eagle is a great investment. If you got your money in that, you're making some loot. And frankly, isn't that what the American consumer cares about? At least the American investor cares about? That's capitalism, folks, pure and simple. And if Miss Sweeny, she wants to do that, she's got a business plan. She's making it work. It's working for her. And frankly, those of us who invest are making money. End of story. There you go. You know, in the number of years I've been doing this podcast, I've had some folks ask me, hey, what about all those pictures on your wall, all those things that we see behind you? Well, I film in my office, and yes, there's pictures on my wall of things that I have done over my lifetime. The one picture people keep talking about is the one over my shoulder, that one back there, standing in front of a T-38. And I said, yep, that's when I was going through undergraduate pilot training for the United States Air Force. They said, well, how'd you get into that? How'd that happen? Well, you got a moment? I guess I'll tell you. I attended college from 1965 to 1969. And anybody who knows anything about what was going on in the world back in those days, know we were involved with the Vietnam War. And so obviously, I was going to college during that time period. And when I get out of college in 1969, when I graduated, obviously that would have put me available for the draft because the draft was a big thing back in that era. If you remember all the draft demonstrations and people burning their draft cards and all sorts of stuff like that, that would have put me in line for the draft. Now, in 1969, the United States government decided they were going to have their first lottery, a national lottery where everybody's birthday was put into a drum, and they would draw out names out of the drum, the birth date, and that would establish what the pecking order in the draft was. So the first number pulled out of the bin, that would be draft number 1, and the second number would be draft number 2, and so on and so forth until you got to 365 total numbers in a year. All right, so that was December 1st, 1969. And I remember that day because I was driving back from work that the day that was going on, listening on the radio because it was broadcast everywhere, and listening for the numbers drawn. And I think the first number drawn was September 17th or 14th, somewhere in that era there. And I kept listening for the numbers because they said, well, only about the first 15 or 20 numbers back in 1969, 1970 would actually be subject to the draft. So anybody over, say, number 25 probably wasn't going to be drafted. Okay, that's what they said. And it was a big show they put on. They had this big drum and their capsules that each had a birth date in there. And so everyone in that era, my era, were listing for their birthday. When was it going to show up? And I kept listening through that show, and it kept going on and on and on. And I still didn't hear my birthday number called. Well, finally, I was driving home from work, and I remember the road I was on. I remember the crossing intersection and the stoplight I was sitting at, which is really weird, when they finally called out my number. And they called out number 361 out of a total of 365. So my draft number was 361. Now, if I'd have been born one day earlier, my draft number would have been 31. If I'd have been born one day later, my draft number would have been like 257, somewhere in there. So, was I lucky? Yes, I was. But that didn't stop me because I had a dream, like many people do. I'm a military brat. I've grown up in military bases. I was driving out a military base when they were calling out numbers, for crying out loud. I wanted to go and serve in the military, and ultimately was given the opportunity to join the United States Air Force. Now, if you want to become a pilot in the Air Force, which is what my goal was, that was my dream, always to become a pilot in the United States Air Force. Well, there's a couple of ways, there's about 3 different ways you could get into the Air Force and into pilot training. Number one was through the academy. The Air Force Academy, we call it the zoo, or the Blue Zoo, whatever you choose to. We call them Zoomies, anybody from the academy. That's way number one. Way number two was people in ROTC. Now, the college that I was going to had Army ROTC, which I wanted nothing to do with. They did not have Air Force ROTC. So I couldn't go through an Air Force ROTC to be commissioned as second lieutenant. And you figure the Air Force Academy makes up about 45% of the people going into pilot training, and the ROTC makes up about the other 45%. So only about 10% at that time. Only 10% of people who are college graduates who went through officers training school actually made it to pilot training. And I was one of those people that, got qualified for officers training school. Now, you take this back in those days. Now, I'm talking 1970. It was a 12-week course. It happened in San Antonio, Texas. Originally, it was on San Antonio. It was on Lackland Air Force Base. Well, then they created an annex of Lackland called Medina. And so they decided to transfer the school over there, the Air Force Officers Training School over there, because that was where the women were and many of the men were, but they still had some remnants of people living on the Lackland and old World War II unair-conditioned military barracks. That's what it was. And I happened to be the last class of people that was on Lackland in those unair-conditioned military barracks in August in San Antonio. If you know anything about Texas, in August in San Antonio, it's hot. It's humid. So we stayed there for the first 6 weeks of a 12-week training period. Our first 6 weeks were at Lackland. In the heat and the humidity, we survived. The last 6 weeks, when we were upper class, as they called it, we moved to Medina for the final 6 weeks. And after 12 weeks of being in song and dance and learning how to march and everything else, you graduate. And that's when I got my orders to flight school. Now, at that time, and this is, like I said, the Vietnam War era, there must have been 10 places in the United States where you could go for training in the military, for Air Force training. There were like 5 in Texas, Del Rio, Laughlin. You had Greece, you had Randolph. Probably forgetting something there in Texas, but there was, I think, 5 in Texas. They had them in Columbus, Mississippi, Moody Air Force Base, Vance in Oklahoma, Shepherd over there in Wichita Falls, and Reese. Anyway, and one located in the Southwest called Williams Air Force Base, Willie. And that was they called it the Palace, because all the other places you could go to, It wasn't great, but Williams Air Force Base, right across. Williams is in Phoenix, Arizona, in case you don't know. And so that's where Williams was. Phoenix, Arizona State, 8. Just so happens, when I graduated from Officers Training School, I got sent to Williams Air Force Base, which works out great because I used to live in Arizona. I spent a lot of time there. I knew Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson. And in my youth, I grew up at a ranch in my grandparents' place in southeastern Arizona. So went to Williams Air Force Base. Now, here's the way it was back then. It's not this way today. Well, back then, you went to undergraduate pilot training. You started flying a T-41, which is a Cessna 172. See how it looks. It's just a plain everyday Cessna. But you went through a civilian airport. Matter of fact, this one was out in I think Marana or somewhere that far away from the Air Force Base and uncontrolled. They had civilian instructors who were there. They were the instructors to put you in the T-41, see if you could fly. Now, originally, my class had 91 students in it, and so we all went to this field, flew in the Cessna 172, and frankly, some of the guys didn't make it. They just simply weren't designed to fly. They didn't like flying. They'd throw up. Who knew? Whatever it was. But that was a weed out. That was a washout plane where people who weren't going to make it were going to fail. And some did. If you completed that, you moved on to the Williams Air Force Base. You started jet training in the T-37. The Tweet, it was called. Twin engine, side by side. And you flew that. So you spent, half the day you were in class. The other half the day you were on the ramp. And you were flying in the Cessna T-37. And that you learned basic maneuvers, basic stuff, spin, getting out of a spin, a lot of stuff like that. Pretty common basic stuff. And I remember I'd flown with my instructor. His name was Bill Savage, first lieutenant. I was his first student after he got out of the training and being an instructor. And I remember after about, 8, 9 rides, whatever it was, we pulled off the side of the runway near the RSO shack. There was one on the field right by the end of the runway. And he said, "Okay, I'm letting you loose." And I went, "What?" "Yeah, you're going to solo." I didn't know what was coming. He gets out of the plane and climbs up and heads over to the shed over there, the portable tower. I'm sitting there in the airplane going, he's going to let me go fly this jet solo? And he did. And I did. So that was how I did T-37 training. And then about a half a year in T-37s, then you switch over to the T-38s, which is the supersonic white. It's a beautiful aircraft. Beautiful. A T-38A at the time. And you flew that for the rest of the time. There you learn about different flight training things, especially formation. And formation is a big thing there. I mean, flying in 2-ship formation, and you got 4 aircraft. That's a big thing. So you kind of learn about what fighter stuff does, when you're flying in the Thunderbird kind of nonsense. And you learn about terrain, flying, and everything else. And at the end of 1 year, about 55 weeks, which is what always is, well, you graduate. And out of our 91 class that we started with, 42 graduated. 42 out of 91. And I was lucky I was one of those. Now, wasn't a big thing. At graduation, you're out there on the ramp, everybody's in the group together, and you're there, and the people are there. My parents were in Europe at the time, stationed over there, because like I said, I'm a brat. And so they weren't there, so I had no family there, so I didn't think much about graduation because I'd been told the day after I graduated, I'm going to survival school in Fairchild Air Force Base up in Washington. So I was not really thinking much about graduation. I'm thinking, I got survival school the day after I graduate. Well, at that graduation, the commander at that time, his name was Ralph Maglione, and he was the colonel. He was the commander of the base. He was a former commander of the Thunderbirds. What I didn't even think about, behind us, the aircraft behind us as we marched around and everything, were the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. They'd come to Williams Air Force Base because Colonel Maglione was their former commander, whatever. We were marching in front of the Thunderbirds. I never thought about it. It never occurred to me. I don't have any pictures of it or anything. I just remember what happened. So yes, I was class 7205. So if you want to look it up, there's where we were. I was in Skitter and Scat Pack. Those are the two squadrons you were in, whether it's 37s or 38s. And yes, I graduated and then when I did that, I ended up taking and flying the aircraft that I had chosen because back in those days, a group of planes would come down. It was called a block. And the block would come down in all these different airplanes. And the number one person scheduled the class with academics and flying grades, that number one person would pick the plane that he wanted from that block. Number two would pick whatever else was left. Number three, number four, number five, whatever. I was high enough in my class where I was able to pick an aircraft that I wanted. And I will tell you this, the aircraft I chose was, it was in the Midwest because my best friend, and still my best friend today from college days, his name's BK. BK was doing his master's work at a place called Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. I don't know. So I looked and seen the slots that were there, and there was an aircraft available to fly, a place called Grissom Air Force Base in Kokomo, Indiana, which was about an hour and a half away from Muncie. And I selected that base because my best friend was doing his master's work there at Ball State. Yes, he and I got together, but eventually he left. But I stayed in Indiana. And I have been in Indiana since the early 1970s. And you know what? I feel today I'm a Hoosier because I love this state and I have no intention of going any other place. I love Indiana. Now you know my story and how I became an Air Force pilot.